Hey, welcome to the fourth day of the conference. I'm David Gorelnik, and it's great to see you here. And just such a pleasure to be with you once again today. So welcome back to the conference. We're on our fourth day. And go ahead and go through a couple of quick things, and then we'll get on to our opening keynote for the day. So we're really glad to have David Kelly here with us. All right, so welcome back once again. We have one quick scheduling note. Shelby Marshall's talk on using online simulations to explore complex topics and apply systems thinking, and that's now going to be today at noon, stream 1. So Shelby had an internet outage in his area yesterday and rescheduled for today. So check that out at noon in stream 1 today. As we go, please feel free to tweet about the conference using the Learning Ideas Con hashtag. Our conference team will continue to be on Twitter, as you can see, at Learning Ideas Co. And as you have questions or comments for our speakers, please directly in Zoom using the Q&A. Also, we'll check the chat as well. But look first, I think, in the Q&A for the questions. And please keep the chat going, of course, as well during the talks. It's been great to see people participating and, even in a virtual environment, getting to spend some time together. So try to keep that going as we move on to the fourth day of the conference. So really good to be here, and good to be here with everybody once again. I'm going to talk a little bit first before we move into the keynote about learning experiences. I'm going to show briefly a little bit from an old example. This is from back in 1991. This is a Boston Chicken cashier training simulation, which was on the early end of training simulations. It's not written up in Wired Magazine, a couple other places. This was learned by doing simulation that we did in 1991, and it helped new cashiers ring up orders quickly and accurately, which was actually not that simple a task as it turned out. Customers in this appeared in video, and most of the training involved ringing up custom orders accurately and correctly on a realistic keyboard. So it looked a little bit like this. Okay, so that's what we saw. If you were a Boston Chicken cashier trainee, this is what it looked like. The thing on the right-hand side is what their keyboard really looked like. So they had this giant touchscreen keyboard that they would really use, and the top part is what the keyboard really looked like. The left-hand side was we used in a couple different ways. We're just getting one screenshot, but as a trainee, you would see some video that would come up kind of in that bottom area under the between the buttons, with a customer saying, "Hey, I'd like a half chicken with cornbread and cranberry walnut relish," or something like that, or probably tortellini salad and fruit salad. So you'd see they place the order, and then you had to decide what to do. And if you had questions, you could ask a tutoring component, "What do I do next? That's now what? How do I do that?" Or would point you to the right keys to use. Or why, because sometimes there were questions about why is this important? Why would I do it this way? So it's not as obvious as one might think. So that was the experience. So there was, sort of a lot of challenge in doing this well, because if you look at the top, there are these performance meters telling the speed and accuracy, and they were real time, right? So it's how fast and how accurate were you? And those gave this a really nice game-like element. And one of the great things about it was that game-like elements and the challenge from the game came from something that's absolutely real. If you want to be a good cashier in real life, you have to be fast and you have to be accurate. Figure things, get things done quickly, don't make mistakes, right? Charge the customer the right amount and using the right set of keys for, there's some differences in the way to enter things so that inventory is correct as well as pricing is correct. So be fast, be accurate, and those are real measures. So when people went through this experience, they actually found it really enjoyable. They found it fun. It was like playing a game, but it was a game of their real job. It wasn't an artificial game built on top of their job. It was a game that was their job. And they thought this was an enjoyable way to learn things. And we also saw that people performed well after taking this training. So this was a really long time ago. And we still don't see enough experiences that are quite this immersive today. And one of the things we're doing in this conference is looking ahead at new technologies and what we can do with them and building more and more immersive experiences, among other things, that work this way. There's a lot of other things we want to do, more just-in-time performance support, but this is kind of a nice example of using game-like elements and using sort of an immersive approach to training, even though it was from some time ago. So I kind of like to bring it up for historical reasons, but also because I think a lot of it still applies today. And then one of the other side effects of all this, one of the other side effects of this training being something that they had, was that it really had a nice impact on the culture, right? So, going back to the sort of the details of this, it was active and enjoyable, was realistic and applicable. So the training transferred to the job, right? So it was clear what you were doing. It was a clear connection between the training and the job, both in terms of people emotionally feeling comfortable doing it and understanding why they had to do it, and in terms of what you actually could learn, learning the skills. It was also necessary that this was a training experience, at least given what we had to work with, that you have to be good at this before you're in front of your customers. So I was mentioning performance support. There's often training that can be replaced with just-in-time performance support. You don't need maybe as much training as a lot of organizations have. But this was one that you did need training. You got to be fast and accurate at this before you go work with your customers. Brief screenshot, I couldn't quite see everything, but there was coaching guidance and feedback. We saw the now, what, how, and why buttons, which was the old way that we had of getting some guidance. If you made mistakes, there was a little tutoring component that would jump in and text and explain your mistakes to you and explain why something was either incorrect or not ideal. Like, yep, that would bring up the right items in the order, but it's the slower way to do it, or that would bring up the right items in the order, but it wouldn't quite inventory them correctly on the back end, so you don't want to do it that way. These are all things that people had learned, and rather than memorizing rules, they learn by doing. But then one of the side effects was that when you're a trainee, that's your first exposure to an organization. Right? So these are entry-level people, so it's really they're coming in their first exposure to the organization, and so it's a nice effect on culture from the people who were exposed to this. They felt like this was something that they felt valued. Right? They felt that the training valued them, that the company valued them. They weren't being treated like a small child who has to memorize a bunch of things and recite the back. They felt this is, I'm going to do this job. This is a fun way to help me learn how to do this job. And I think that's probably the point I want to, take away a little bit from this. And where we are now is, we can establish a culture of learning with new technologies, better technologies, more opportunities. So a lot we can talk about and a lot we can do, and a lot of what the conference is really at its heart all about. A couple of things I want to know sort of related. I do a lot of classes and seminars, and in them I ask people to talk about the memorable learning experiences that they've had, the most memorable experiences. And here are a couple of examples. These are from real people. These are not the actual real people, but people who look sort of like. But they are real people from some of the classes and seminars. So one talks about her most memorable learning experiences when her sister taught her how to drive a car. Another was when her aunt taught her to crochet. Another one is about being on a great soccer team with great teammates and a great coach. When I ask this question, almost never do I get answers that are from workplace learning experiences. And I don't get that many answers that are from formal learning in any way. When people come up with their most memorable learning experiences, they're all very, very frequently from something outside and from something maybe a little more informal. Maybe they formed a relationship with someone and the relationship was important. It's true of a lot of these people. There was a lot of doing, there was a lot more flexibility, there was a lot more personalization. So all these are characteristics that I think that we want to continue to have. Because when I talk to people about corporate learning experiences, we get way too many of these things, and we're getting better, but this is the opportunity to really reimagine what education is. Right? We have people who wait to the last minute, they click through, they feel it's a waste of their time, and these are real comments from people as well. Certainly wonderful things going in within organizations as we've seen at this conference and other places, but there's a lot more work that we can do, and there's a perception of a lot of online learning that we can conquer and change by reimagining what we do. And technology has the opportunity to reimagine things. So again, looking back, this was fun, right? The cashier training module was actually a lot of fun, and people didn't come out saying, I couldn't wait for it to end. They came out saying, hey, that was a pretty fun game. I don't think they went home and did it in their free time. Couldn't at that time, but it was a fun thing to do. So the future holds so many opportunities with new technologies and the opportunity to do so many different things that change the perception of education and workplace learning, and that put us in a position to completely reimagine what learning experiences are. And we're certainly seeing a lot of steps in that direction. A lot of great examples of that here. And we're going to talk more about the future, and that's going to lead me to David Kelly, who I'm delighted to have as our keynote speaker for today. David is the executive director of the Learning Guild. He's been a learning and performance consultant and training director for over 20 years. He's a leading voice in exploring how technology can be used to enhance training, education, learning, and organizational performance. He's a very frequent speaker at industry events. He's a previous contributor to organizations including ATD, eLearn Magazine, Lingos, and many, many more. And what I really want to do is give you a chance to hear David and talk with him. So David's going to talk to us about a look ahead, the now and next of learning and technologies within organizations. And I'm delighted to introduce him. So let me turn it over to David Kelly.
Excellent. Well, it's good to see everybody. Thank you so much for joining us here today. As David was introducing me, I realized that while most men that I know during the last 18 months have just let their face hair grow out, I need a new pick because I've been shaving throughout the last 18 months. But I'm pleased to be here with you today to talk about the now and next of learning and technology. Let me just share my screen to get our conversation started. And I do encourage you, while I'm sharing my screen, to make this a full-on conversation. Should be seeing my sliding deck, start deck now here. Make this conversation. Please use chat, add your comments, add your questions as we go along. I have it on another screen here, so I'm happy to respond to any sort of thoughts that people have as we get here. Looking forward to spending some time with you exploring this question, these ideas of the now and next of learning and technology. So whenever you do a presentation like this, anytime I'm asked to speak, you know that a presentation like this, the most important thing that you have is your title slide. And that's what I want to talk a little bit for here. But before I jump into my thought process around my title slide, I want to remind you of, I want to share with you a particular link that you're seeing on your screen right here. I will share this again at the end. If you're someone who likes to take notes, who likes to get copied of slides and things of that sort, everything that we go through will be at that link. It'll take you to a page on my blog that has the slides, although by the end of this presentation, you'll note that the slides are really not that helpful as much as the content that the slides references. There are more pictorial backgrounds to what we're going to be chatting about here. But it'll have any resources that I mentioned during the talk will be available on that page, as well as a host of additional resources that can take you down different rabbit holes based on the conversation that we have here. Again, I will show that link at the end. So let's jump into the presentation. So again, I mentioned you do a presentation like this, your title slides, the most important thing, sets the tone, tells people what you're going to be talking about. And as I thought about the title of this session, the now and next of learning and technology, I thought about, you know, the fortune teller peering into the future, kind of looking at what's there. And then I thought, yeah, it's a bit of a cliche, the whole soothsayer thing. Maybe I should do that. Maybe I should lean into the technology piece people are very interested in and go with a backdrop that is more technology based, reflective of the technologies that we're using. And I kind of thought, maybe that's too cliche as well, stock image type thing. What's the core element of what we're talking about during a presentation like this? And ultimately what it comes down to is we're exploring how technology is going to be shaping the future of learning, education, and training. And there's this predictive nature to it of how is the world changing? How is technology driving change? And what is the future of L&D going to look like? When I got to that core value proposition of looking into the future and predicting what's going to happen to our field, I thought, well, why not be fully transparent about that and go with a blindfolded monkey throwing darts? Because the reality is nobody knows what the future of learning is going to look like. And we all have information, we all have data that's available to us, and we can kind of make educated guesses, but we don't necessarily know what's going to happen. One of the things I also think is we tend to overestimate how quickly change is going to happen within our industry. You know, somebody asked me even just yesterday in a presentation that I was doing, what do you think the future of learning is going to look like in 3 years? And I was like, what does it look like today? Because it doesn't move that fast. There will be certain elements of how our strategies will shift, but largely things don't change all that quickly. But I use this image jokingly, but there's also an important aspect to this. A presentation like this is not to tell you about what's going to happen. My role in the Learning Guild is one that I've always been a student of the field. I mean, even when I was a practitioner working in finance and nonprofits, it's been a large portion of my career there. I've always been a student of the field, always been very curious what's going on in the field and how technology is changing what we do. And now in my role at the Guild, that's kind of my job, is to stay on top of that. So what I'm going to be spending some time doing with you here today is going over the trends that we see and some of the shifts that we see at a broad basis. But it's not to say that anything that I'm going to share with you is right or wrong. It's just what we see. And you have to decide what's right or wrong within the context of the work that you're doing. Because what works well in one organization may not necessarily be appropriate in another. That doesn't make one right or wrong. It just makes it appropriate within the context in which it's being applied. There might be some moments where I get on a personal soapbox and kind of say, this is my opinion on it. But for the most part, I'm here to share some data with you, share my observations, and then you can make decisions about your strategy based on that. But one of the things I think is really important before we get into the trends is to kind of set the tone and to set some expectations about what it is that we're looking at here. And for me, it starts with language. I have been increasingly obsessed with language in terms of how it affects our field, how it affects our world. One of my favorite scholars and philosophers is the comedian George Carlin. And one of the things he said that has always resonated with me is he has a whole skit that I encourage you to go to YouTube and check out on language, as long as you don't mind profanity. And one of the things he says in that I think is extremely powerful is we think in language. And so the thoughts the thoughts and quality of our thoughts and ideas, the quality of our thoughts and ideas can only be as good as the quality of the language, because the language that we use shapes the way that we view the world. And I think that that's really important, because I do think that some of the language and the jargon that we use in L&D puts us in a certain box. And sometimes that box is a good thing, but I think often that box can be very limiting to us. But the biggest thing is to be aware of it, to be aware of the language that we use and how it shapes the way that we think. And I'm going to use this session as an example of what I mean by this. So there are two different ways that this session could be titled. And it's been titled this way in the past. I do this session at a lot of different events, and I enjoy doing it because every time I do it, it's a new iteration of it, because the world changes. But there are two different ways that this session has often been presented. The now and next of learning and technology, and the now and next of learning technology. Now, you might look at that and say you're splitting hairs. It's the same session. For me, these are two very, very different sessions. These are even though the only difference between the two is the word "and," that one word completely changes the value proposition of what we're doing and what we would be talking about. Because we use this phrase learning technology, and we use it, but the words themselves have meaning, but there's more meaning in terms of how we interpret it through practice. I work for the Learning Guild. We host conferences all a couple of times a year that you've probably been to in-person conferences, whether it's one of ours or one of the other ones held around the globe that has an expo with it. And I would argue that if you asked me to describe the expo, I would probably describe it as an expo that features lots of product, services, and learning technology. And one of our sister events over in London is literally called the Learning Technologies Show. But I would argue, if you went into any of the shows, the ones that we host included, that you're not walking around and seeing an exhibition of learning technologies. You're seeing an exhibition full of education and training technologies. And that is not to say that it's right or wrong or better or worse, but it is important to recognize that it's different. There is a difference between education and training technologies and learning technologies, the technologies through which we learn. And again, it might sound like I'm splitting hairs, but to me, this is a huge difference in terms of the way that we view the work that we do. I want to give you a couple of examples of why the difference between education and training technologies and the difference between how I look at learning and technology as compared to learning technologies. First one starts with this guy. If any of you have ever seen me speak, you know I am contractually obligated to mention my children in every presentation that I do. This is that moment. This is my son, Shay. This is Christmas morning a few years ago, and he's playing with the favorite toy that he got this year. If you're a Star Wars fan, you already recognize what that is. If you're not, it is a BB-8 droid from one of the recent Star Wars films. It is a remote control toy that you put an app on your phone and you're able to control this toy around the house by remote control. And if we're being completely honest, he got it Christmas because I wanted to play with it. That's aside, that's a whole another presentation. But what I found really interesting that morning, after we installed the app on his mother's phone, so he could play with this thing, And Christmas morning was over. He's playing with it. I'm in the other room making breakfast. And he calls me in the room. He says, "Dad, I need your phone." Now I'm thinking that this is going to be the worst Christmas ever because he's asking because he broke his mother's phone. But I walk in the room and he's sitting there and he's using his mother's phone to use the app. And I said, "What's going on?" He said, "I need your phone because I want to go on YouTube to see how to do tricks and stuff with this." And now you have to realize something about the Kelly household in order for this story to have the weight it deserves. I am the techie shiny guy. You know, if there's something new, there's something interesting, I want to go out and play with it and learn about it and explore it. My wife is the person that's put down the phone, go outside, kick a ball. We balance each other out very well. So that's important to realize because I'm thinking to myself that like my wife does not like to come downstairs and see her son with any device in his hand. So the idea of her coming downstairs and seeing him with 2 devices in his hands is not exactly something that any of us really want to have happen in our house because she's not gonna like that. And I explained that to him. I said, so and I said to him, so here's what you're gonna have to do. You can't have 2 phones. You can turn off the app that's using the toy, turn on the YouTube app, watch the video, then come back and turn the app back on and use it. And I can't tell you how unreasonable I was being as a father in his mind. But I said, sorry, you're gonna have to deal with that. And I go out of the room, go back and make breakfast. And then I hear the YouTube video playing, but it's playing way too loud for it to be coming from a smartphone. So I go back in the room and there he is with the phone playing, with the app running, playing with the toy. And there on the television set is the YouTube video that he's playing. And as I'm sitting there wondering whether or not I should reprimand him for not doing what I asked him to do or compliment him for his ingenuity, I looked down at the box that this thing came from, and there, still perfectly sealed in plastic, is the 60 some odd page instruction booklet that has not been opened and probably has still to this day has never been opened. That had all the details that he could have wanted to do, but he just went in and played with it, and he just went to YouTube. And I found that really, really interesting. And I want to be clear about this. This is not about him being a digital native or what generation he's from or any other stereotype that we seem to think is okay to assign to people based on their age. It's not okay. But it's not about that anyway. This is just reflective of what it means to exist in a digital world, what it means to have access to solutions to problems in the moment readily available to you in an increasingly digital world. I'll give you another example. This one was very specific to me, but I'll give you another example that even though I'm looking at the list of people who are here, I've not met many of you, but I'm still willing to bet my house that even though we're coming from all around the world, all different places, that we've all shared the next experience. You're out to dinner with your friends, your family, you're having, the food is great, the conversation is flowing, it's the most comfortable dinner of all time. You look as fabulous as the people on this screen right now. It is the most comfortable and wonderful dinner party you've ever had, and everything is just flowing great. And then someone at the table will ask a question that nobody knows the answer to. It just brings everything to a quiet silence. Someone will break that silence at that table by saying something. It's the same thing that everybody says. You can throw it in chat if you know what I'm talking about. But someone will break that silence. I don't care where you are. It's always broken with the same phrase. And that phrase is Google it. Another thing that's never happened in that situation, no one, I'll bet my house again, no one has ever been in that situation and said, you know what, that's a great question. I'm going to log into the learning management system and see if I can find the answer. And I want to be clear, that is not a criticism of the LMS or LXPs or any platforms that we use. They serve a valuable purpose, and they are a major and critical part of the infrastructure and the ecosystem that we use to support the organizations that we serve. It's not a criticism of them at all. It's a statement that is reflective of the world that we live in. Another thing that nobody said in this situation is they didn't pull out their phone and say, you know what, I'm going to get the answer for myself because I'm a self-directed learner. That's our jargon. That's what we say. It's essentially what's going on right now. They're taking advantage and control of their own learning, but no one saw it as a learning moment. They saw it as a problem, and even unconsciously saw it as a problem. The problem being not knowing. I don't know what the answer is here, but I've got a tool that can get me the answer right away, and I'm going to just solve the problem. And that's what it means to live in a digital world. That's not about learning. It's not about education. It's not about training. It's just about living. And I think that that's one of the things we miss out on in our field
if you want to understand what the future of learning and technology looks like, you don't look at education and training. If you want to understand and be able to predict how technology is going to change how people learn, you have to look at how technology is changing how we live our daily lives. Because it's that pattern of behavior, it's those pivots that we make about how we live in an increasingly digital world that are shaping expectations and behaviors around how we learn as individuals. And those should be embedded in those shifting behaviors around just how we learn in our daily lives, should be shaping the lens through which we look at in terms of how we support education and training. And I think that that's an important lens for us to be looking as we start talking about some of these trends that are affecting our future. So as we start moving forward with this, in terms of setting the expectation of what this session is, it's not a discussion about technology, although we will be mentioning and talking about a lot of different technologies throughout this discussion. It's not a discussion about learning, although we will be putting it into the context of the work that we do as learning professionals. And it's certainly not a conversation specifically about training, although elements of what we're going to talk about do impact our training strategies. Ultimately, this is a conversation about disruption. Now, again, I mentioned earlier how my interest in language. And disruption is a word to me that I find very fascinating because people have a visceral reaction to the word. Either they look at it as change and they don't like change. You know, it's going to disrupt things. I'm not used to that. I don't like that. It's going to change things. Or they could be part of the buzzwords of the 21st century and like disruption. What are we going to disrupt? I don't know. We need to be a disruptive company. What are we going to disrupt? I don't know, but we're going to disrupt something because disruption is good, and they're going to disrupt for disruption's sake. And people have that sort of visceral reaction to it. But what I find really fascinating is disruption is a completely neutral word. It's not positive or negative. It's just a change in the status quo. It could be a substantially large change in the status quo, like we've seen in the last 18 months. But even something like we've seen in the last 18 months, while there has been a huge disruption to the world and immense amounts of tragedy, I don't want to minimize that in any way, shape, or form. There are still seeds of opportunity within every crisis. So it was a major disruption, but if you find the right mindset, you can find the opportunities and the silver linings, even in tragedies and in crises. But you have to decide to put on a mindset that enables you to see those things. And what I find really interesting about the disruption portion of this is we've been through this before a number of times in the L&D field. You know, many of us come from a world of classroom training. Many of you who are watching this right now might be still supporting classroom training, pandemic aside, as part of your learning and development strategy. Sometimes being in a room with people and having an in-person experience is the right method to address a particular learning and development need. I come from a world, I've been in this field long enough, a number of hair colors, where this was training where I first started. We didn't have e-learning, we didn't have technology-based learning. Everything was a workshop. Everything took place in the classroom. And this was what training was for me, for a lot of organizations. It's interesting, the more often I do this talk, the more I'm recognizing that as I get older, there are people in the room who like, no, we never did classroom training. But for a lot of us, this was all that's there. And for many of you who are watching right now, you may still be doing this. But there was a time for those of you who are younger, where this is all there was. And then one day these computers came about. We had this new thing coming out called e-learning. And it was a major disruption to what people saw as learning and development. And we've been through this. My question would be, who was e-learning disruptive to? When it first emerged, if you've lived through it, or if you didn't live through it, you saw it on TV in a show, or you're just thinking about it, think about who it was disruptive to. Put it into chat, but just think about it. And it was disruptive to a number of different groups. I personally focus on three groups. It's not that they're the only three groups, but I'm going to talk about three primary groups that when e-learning emerged, it was disruptive to. The first were the learners themselves. Now, first thing, full disclosure, this picture lies. And I say that this lies as someone who works for the Learning Guild, as someone who works for a company that up until about a year and a half ago was called the e-learning guild. I'm very passionate about the work that we do. I think the ability to give people technology-based learning solutions is truly transformative. I think learning is something that can change the world in ways nothing else can. It's why I'm passionate about the work that we do and consider it a privilege to do the work that I do. All that said, no one has ever, in the history of e-learning, ever been that happy to take a course. But that aside, it was really disruptive to the world of e-learning. Because if you think about it, we are conditioned through 20 plus years of our early lives on this idea of what learning looks like. It looks like school. It looks like there's an expert who's going to be in the front of the room, who's going to lecture and engage me in exercises, if I'm lucky, around how to learn about a particular topic. And I'm a student and I'm going to gain from the expert. And now you want me to sit in front of a computer and have the content given to me, and I'm going to do it on my own. We take it for granted today because it's so commonplace, but it was really disruptive to learners as a new idea when it first arrived. And I think we actually saw a little bit more of that in the last 18 months in our education system, as people were forced to do online learning who've never done it before. Those of you who didn't live through this in your work probably saw a little bit of this in your personal life and in the world in general in the last 18 months. So learners and students were very disruptive. I would also say the trainers were really disruptive. You know, when I first started in this field, and I was I spent most of my time in this field in a workshop. Spent a lot of my time doing workshops for people. That was my zone. That was my comfort zone. I had my facilitator's guide. I had my workshop guide for people. I had everything that we did. That was my zone, and I was comfortable there. And then suddenly I had to build a drag and drop, and I had to build self-paced e-learning courses and dragging drops, and what am I dragging, why am I dropping it, what's happening with my career. It was really disruptive to people. They had to go outside of their comfort zone. And again, we've seen a lot of that in our education system in the last 18 months, where teachers had to be pushed into this space. But it's really disruptive there. And the last group, and in many ways, I think is the most important group, just in the context of we have to, it expands the lens of groups in this manner, are the organizations themselves. We tend to think of who's this disrupting, and we naturally go towards people because people have workflows and things that they do and patterns and habits, and these disrupt those habits. But organizations have workflows, organizations have habits. And when e-learning arrived, it disrupted the workflows, it disrupted those habits. Now, keeping in mind, again, disruption just means a change in the status quo. For a lot of organizations, when e-learning first arrived, they were like, hold on a second. So we don't have to spend money to send everybody to the training center. We don't have to pay for the flights and the hotels and the per diem and all that. They can do it at their desk while they're, and just spend a couple of hours doing it there. It's going to save us millions of dollars a year. Sign me up. You can make the argument that organizations leaned a little too hard when e-learning first came about, or even today in some cultures, towards that value proposition. But that was seen as a positive disruption. And I share that story for two reasons. One is many of us have lived through it, and we understand what that means, and we understand what it means to have the L&D field disrupted by something like this. But more importantly, that was one disruption. It was a big one. The emergence of the personal computer and e-learning coming about. It was a big one, but it was one disruption that changed a lot of things in how we approach L&D and what it means to work in this field. And what I find really interesting about the moment that we're in now, in the last couple of years, and especially now even more amplified by the last 18 months that we've been going through with the pandemic, is that it's not one change, not one technology that's emerging, not one force of external pressure that is changing things within the context of L&D. There are multiple things going on, all of which are creating change, not only in the work that we do in L&D, but more importantly in the way that we work in general. And those are shaping how, if work, we keep hearing this phrase, the future of work. If the world of work is changing, and our job for many of us can be oversimplified to say that we need to support people in their work, then our work is changing as work itself changes. And there are multiple forces that are changing the future of work, and thus the future of L&D. So if you thought that going through one change was disruptive, going through many of them at the same time is going to be a lot. Now, what we're going to do now is shift from me giving some context and hopefully shaping the lens through which I hope you see this conversation and look at the work, to talking about many of these trends. Before I do that, a couple of just some context about what we're going to do. We're going to talk about a number of different trends. I encourage you, as I said earlier, to throw your comments or questions into chat as we do so. But we're going to talk about a number of them. I have put them in a very broad stroke chronological order, in terms of things that are happening now or might be happening soon to things that are further out. That is a very, very broad stroke based on my observations and the research that we've done, team members of our team have done at the Guild. That is not a black and white statement of fact. That's just the order in which that I've decided to put these into. I may describe something and say this is something that organizations are doing today, and you might hear me say that and go, wow, that's not even on our radar today. And I might describe a technology or a new solution and say this is something that's going to be probably 5-10 years down the road before it becomes mainstream. And you might be saying, wow, we've been doing that for a couple of years. Are we too soon? That's not the point here. You have to put it into you. Every organization has a unique culture. Every organization has a different maturity level as to what their learning culture is, what their comfort level is in terms of implementing technology. And there is no right or wrong. There is a right or wrong within your context. So I might point these broad strokes, but what works for one organization isn't going to work for another. So I'm hoping that what we're sharing here today, you can then take into the context, not to say what's right or wrong, but what's right or wrong for me, for my organization, for the work that I'm doing. There will also be times where I will get on my own personal soapbox and kind of say, this is what I think about it. And I'll try to point those out so that it's kind of very obvious that I'm just putting my own personal spin on something. But even then, it needs to be put into your own context. So with that, let's jump in. I'm going to take a quick drink before I go forward. All right. So first thing, multi-device learning. Now, some of you might be seeing this and saying, yeah, we're doing this. And for many, if just a very quick foundation, if you're not doing this, what I mean when I'm saying multi-device learning is there was a time when e-learning arrived that we were just designing for a desktop screen. And now we heard this phrase M-learning that came up when mobile devices came out about how we design for M-learning. We actually don't use that term quite as much anymore because it's the mobile devices are just part of the ecosystem now. It's not that M-learning needs to be something separate. It's these devices need to be integrated into the existing strategies. And multi-device learning is you hear this phrase responsive design in this conversation, where you're using a type of design and different tools that enable the content to be reformatted in a way that it is appropriate to be consumed on different devices. Some of you may not be aware, but when mobile devices first came out, we did the really, really smart thing of taking the 4:3 desktop screen and shrinking the content so that it could go on a mobile device. And in some cases, it made the content that we had, what's the term, unusable. So we now have responsive design that takes the content that we have and reformats it in a way that it can be consumed appropriately based on the device that someone is using. And on its own, that's a good thing. That's what for a lot of us, we hear this phrase responsive design, and the idea of having content be reformatted in a way that I can consume it in an appropriate manner regardless of the device that I have. It's hard to argue that that's not a good thing. It is a good thing, but it's not enough. It's not enough. It repeats a mistake that I think we make often in our industry. This will be the first soapbox moment. And when I do some of these, sometimes I'll bring it up, and it applies not just here, it applies to a lot of different spaces, but the first time it's going to apply is in this context of multi-device learning. The mistake that I think we make with new technologies is we approach them with the wrong question. Mobile devices emerge and we say, wow, how do I do what I do with these new smartphones that people have? And that's the wrong question. That's a question that comes with blinders, the blinders being referred to as what I do. And it's kind of saying, how do I do what I do on this desktop experience on this mobile device that I have? But that's the wrong question, because it comes with the blinders, whether we're aware of it or not, of what I do. It's why a lot of the early stuff that was on mobile phones was ported information. It was this desktop experience that we just moved to a phone. And what we really did is we treated the mobile phones just as a screen, like the desktop that many of you are looking at. But if you think about your mobile phone, it's much more than a screen. And it's got so many things that a mobile phone can do that your desktop can't do. I think about my mobile phone, the one that I've got sitting here. It's where I am in the East Coast of the United States. It's 9:40 a.m. I've probably used my phone somewhere around 187 different ways, starting from the point that it woke me up as my alarm clock. And I haven't made a phone call yet on it, but I've used it all these different ways, using all the unique affordances of this device. And now if I compare that to how most organizations are using these devices in the context of learning and development, it's a much smaller world there. And I think a lot of that is shaped by this idea of how we look at these devices and approaching it with the wrong question. It's not about looking at new devices and saying, how do I do what I do with this new technology? It's about flipping that question and saying, how does this new technology change what I do? What could I do with this new technology that I've never been able to do before? Though that's where the possibilities emerge. That's where the opportunities of these new devices come in. Your smartphones have cameras on it, accelerometers, GPSs that have the context of where you are at any given moment. If you just treat it as a second screen, you're leaving all of that functionality and opportunity off the table. So responsive design is a good thing, and it's better than just porting over your desktop content, but we have to do more. I think when we look at multi-device learning, we need to be able to consider what's unique about this device, what's unique about this new technology. Even the mere fact that this is in my pocket at any given point, and thus can support me wherever I am, whatever I'm doing, changes the way that you might approach designing for something like this. So I do think that this is a trend that is just going to continue, but the biggest takeaway I would recommend that you do is just remember, when you're approaching any new technology, don't look at it through that question of how do I do what I do with this new technology that people are using now, and look at it more through the lens of how does this new technology change what I do? What can I do differently that I've never been able to do? More importantly, what problem can this new technology solve that we've struggled to solve in the past, or we haven't been able to solve in the past? That's going to give you that's going to enable you to harness the true potential of these new technologies as they emerge. Getting off my soapbox now. Next technology I want to talk about, data and analytics. This is something that is changing the way that we view L&D, and it's changing the way that we work. And you might have heard through conversations or events that you've been at, or different professional development opportunities that you have around how L&D is changing. We have learning experience platforms, and we have XAPI and different functionality, different specs that are used in higher education and other spaces that are changing the type of data that we can collect and thus report on. Getting us, historically, we've only reported things like completions and test scores and such, and those are not business metrics. Those are not performance metrics. But the world of data and analytics is rapidly advancing, that we can collect and share and report on more granular information, more information that is connected to competency, more information that is connected to performance, more information that is connected to business outcomes. And that is a really powerful shift to what we can do. But even that context is secondary to why it's important to me here. Because the reality is data and analytics is changing the way that we work in general. Data and analytics isn't just about we can collect all of these different things. And we hear this phrase, big data, all the time. What's big data? Well, it's data, but it's really, really big data. And it's not about that. It's not about how much data we have. It's not about how much, it's not even about the computers that can process all of this massive amounts of data. It's about business intelligence. I wish I knew where this image came from so that I could credit it appropriately. But it's a powerful image for me, because this, to me, is why data and analytics is so important. It's not about the data. It's not even about the fact that computers can crunch the data and organize it in a way that's more useful. It's about the fact that we're getting data-informed decision-making in place. It's about the fact that you hear this phrase a lot more in higher ed than you do corporate learning, around predictive analytics, that we can use the data to inform our decisions, to better anticipate the needs of people. We hear personalized learning a lot in our field, and the data and analytics under the hood are driving things like that. We'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later. But this is changing the way that we do things. It's also changing accountability. This is another soapbox moment. I mentioned earlier that for a lot of us in L&D who are interested in this space, we're playing in the XAPI space. We're playing in the learning record stores and the LXP places to try to get more data and understand and better support the organizations that we serve. But for others of you, you might be in an organization, again, not right or wrong, it's just different, that you're not in a position to drive this. You're not in a position to, you don't have the resources, it's not within your culture to drive a transformative and innovative data and analytics strategy within L&D. Not right or wrong, it's just different. But it doesn't absolve you from this conversation. Because in my opinion, for the big data conversation, the data and analytics conversation, and how it's going to shift L&D, it's not an if, it's a when for every organization on the planet, just about. And the reason that I say that and why it's so important is because it's just changing the world of work. And you may not be in a position to drive this, and that's okay. But at some point, you're going to get a knock on the door from your IT department, and they're going to say, we're plugging in a new HRIS system, and it's going to use APIs to connect all of the data sets across the entire organization, including your LMS and any other platforms that you're using. It's going to be a major project, and we're going to need your support. And when that happens, you don't want to be in the situation to say, no problem, happy to work with you, just give me 20 minutes to Google everything that you just said. We have this skill set that I think we need to be developing in L&D that I refer to personally as conversational competence. My mother would probably refer to it as knowing enough to be dangerous. But I do think that there are certain things that are happening in the world of work that are going, and we support the world of work, that we need to be aware of. We need to be at least aware and knowledgeable enough of the things that are impacting our businesses, so that when they are presented to us, even if we're not proactively driving a change around it or taking advantage of these technologies, we're ready to participate in that conversation. We talk about this phrase, as long as I've been in this field, that L&D needs a seat at the table. It's things like conversational competence that earn us that seat at the table, that when a conversation is presented to us, or a project is presented to us that we need to support, that we're not caught off guard, that we are at least cognizant of the stuff that's impacting our business and knowledgeable enough to be able to participate in those initial discussions and show that we are a performance partner related to that. This does not just apply to data and analytics. It's just the slide where I presented. This applies to just about every trend. You should be knowledgeable enough of the trends that are impacting your organization and that are impacting the world of L&D. I'll give you one other thing that's important here. One of the things that has changed about the world of work, my parents, they worked for one company their entire lives. That's not the reality for most of us these days, that most people work for different companies and they're going to have 5, 6 more employers throughout their career. So the job that you have today may not be the job, for many of us, it's likely not the job you're going to have tomorrow. So data and analytics may not necessarily be a major driver in the work environment that you're in today. But it doesn't absolve you from knowing it, not only because you want to be ready if somebody knocks on the door, but you want to be positioning yourself for the jobs of tomorrow. So while there is no right or wrong in terms of, as I mentioned earlier, about what is right or wrong within an organization's culture, you have to apply this to the unique environment that you're working in. You also have to apply it to the context of what you want for your career. Because data and analytics may not be something that you need to spend a lot of your resources on in the work that you're doing today. But if you're not playing and aware of that space, it may be limiting you from the job you want to have tomorrow. You may look at a job and say, wow, that's great. I want to apply for that job. And then you look into the requirements and you see that that organization prioritizes data and analytics more than your current organization. And you don't want to be in a situation where that's going to happen, because this is changing the way we approach work. This is changing the way that we approach L&D. And if you're not staying on top of it, you could be limiting yourself from future opportunities. That applies to a lot of different fields, a lot of different aspects of change. But I do think being a student of the L&D field and recognizing how the skill sets and the expectations are changing, especially within innovative organizations, gives you a lens on what skills you want to be developing for yourself from a career growth perspective, even beyond the what do I need to do to support my organization today. I'll come down from my soapbox now. Next topic, interactive video. I'm fascinated by the world of interactive video, but I want to be clear about what I mean by interactive video. Interactive video, there's a lot of things that fall under the heading of interactive video. The interactive video is a very basic phrase that a lot of things would fall under. For instance, if I was going to take little snippets of video and record different videos of different scenarios and and each one is triggered by a decision point. So I call a bunch of little, I've done this many times in my previous work. We have like little 1 to 2 minute video snips, and it ends with a question of, would you make this decision, or would you make that decision? I'll show my age by saying a choose your own adventure type model, where you have a little video, they watch it, they have to make a decision, and then based on what decision they make, a different video will play. Basically a branching scenario that is video based. And that is an interactive experience with video, but I'm talking about something different. There are 2 major categories that I think the interactivity of video is shaping creating new opportunities and new experiences. The first is when I'm seeing video largely embedded, being used as an assessment tool. And I don't mean testing tool, I mean, it could be a test, but I mean more along the lines as an assessment tool, where you give someone a scenario and they turn on their camera and they just implement the solution. Could be practicing so that they can see themselves doing it, could be submitting it as part of a learning experience where an instructor or your peers are reviewing it and giving you feedback. And there's so much digital meta attached to that, where if I'm watching someone else's video and I make a comment, it links it to the exact moment at the point in the video that I was watching. And it makes video a much more interactive experience between people in a synchronous or asynchronous way. And I'm seeing that more and more, and I think that is a transformative use of video that we haven't seen in the past. The other piece of it is, and I mentioned the metadata, the searchability of video. Right now, if this recording was public on YouTube and you were going to search for it, you could search by my name, although my parents, who have a very generic last name, also blessed me with one of the most generic first names. So good luck searching David Kelly on the internet. But if you could search under someone's name, you could search under the title of the video, you could search under maybe something that came up in the description, if there was a description attached to the video. But you're really searching the type of information that's added to the description of a video, as compared to being able to do a search and having the search include anything that I said, the transcript essentially from the video, or even something that might be seen in the video where there's a visual search option on there. And those technologies exist today. There are some proprietary platforms that do it, but it's not evenly distributed. It's not going to, you're not going to pick up in a Google search something that I said in this video, or to say, mug, and it picks up the fact that I that there's a picture of a mug that appeared in this video. That's not evenly distributed, but it's coming. And if you put that in the context of how many of us, again, are living our daily lives, I am the type of person, and a lot of people are, where if there's something that needs to be done and I haven't done it before, I'm going to go to YouTube. I'm going to search and see if there's a video that gives me a quick tutorial that shows you how to do that. I do that at my house all the time. Unfortunately, 9 out of 10 times, because I'm not a handy person, it's verifying the fact that this is well outside my skill set. But on those 10th ones, I'll apply what I see there. And I think a lot of us do that. But if I'm going to try to fix something, if I'm going to try to fix the toilet, I don't know what's wrong with it. So my ability to do a search today that's going to get me to the right video is limited. But if I'm going to describe what I'm seeing, and it's going to be able to pick up on someone who said that sort of a thing in a video, or is seeing that sort of a thing in their video, and it's going to bring me that, my ability to use video as a problem-solving tool is transformative. And when that becomes an evenly distributed thing, its applications and its implications and its possibilities and opportunities in the context of learning are exponential. And I'm really excited to see how that's going to happen. I think it's something we should all be following. Games and gamification. Games and gamification, I usually list this on 2 separate slides. Why do I list it on 2 separate slides? Because they're 2 separate things. But a lot of times we link those 2 things together. But I do think it's important to recognize that 2 separate things. While there are technologies that are making more interactive games and giving us more ability to support behavior through gamification techniques, I don't list it there so much because of the technology advancements, although I think that's important. I share it here more so because of the research that's emerging around why games and gamification are effective in the context of learning. When I was working at a bank, we did some games-based learning experiences. And the biggest challenge that we had within that was when we were working with subject matter experts and stakeholders was the word games. You work for a bank. If I was going to go into my CFO's office and be like, all right, I understand this project, it's a major project for the company. This is what we need to do. We're going to get everybody together. We're going to play a game. He would have responded with, no, we're not. Please leave my office. And I think that's one of the challenges that we have because it wasn't credentialized. And we tried to fix that a couple of years ago by we don't call them games anymore. We call them serious games. And I don't think that's the point. And if I can get on my soapbox a little bit again, I think sometimes our jargon gets in the way. I mentioned that we've used games in my past life at a bank. One of my members of my team, I remember a conversation that we had where she was going to go pitch to a stakeholder, a particular department that needed to do something, a games-based solution. She came in, she gave me her 2-minute spiel on how she was going to describe the stakeholder. I said, and it was good. Described everything that exactly as we were going to do it and how it was going to impact performance and how it was a very succinct pitch. She did a great job. I said, do me a favor, give me the pitch again, but don't say the word game. She said, why? I said, because that's all they're going to hear is the word game. Give me the pitch again and don't say the word game. And she struggled. She struggled to be able to figure out a way to do that. We spent like a half an hour just kind of going over it until she finally got being able to describe the activities that we were going to go through and being able to describe how those activities were going to support the performance, and just took the word game out of it. And she was just like, I get it. And I think sometimes our language can distract us when we use our own jargon. We should be talking about what people are going to be doing, not necessarily the labels that we might be applying it to. But that's a separate soapbox thing. I think why I put games and gamification on this list, is to come back to the core point, is there's a lot of good research that is enabling us and the world in general to better understand the learning and performance possibilities that games and gamification are teaching us. One other thing that applies to a lot of different areas, but it first appears here in this presentation. I also encourage you to look outside of L&D to understand the possibilities of what we can be doing here. There are a lot of fields that do things that are doing similar things to what we're doing that we can learn from. For instance, the marketing field. If you think about what marketing is at an overly simplified level, it's the creation of content and experiences to support someone's behavior change, to support a desired change of behavior. And if you define marketing that way, you can see a lot of parallels to what we do as L&D professionals. One of the big differences between marketing and L&D, even though we're both in the business at an overly simplified level of creating content and experiences to support a desired behavior change, is that marketing gets a lot of money. And marketing, because they're directly derived from sales, they get a different type of budget, understandably so. But because they have that type of budget, they are able to play in these spaces more than we are. And in the context of gamification especially, there's a lot of interesting things that the marketing field has done that we can learn from. One of the things I highly recommend anybody who's interested in gamification looks at is some of the studies that have been done in the marketing field around the differences between gamification, where you're the differences in gamification between using gamification to motivate someone towards a specific behavior, and using gamification in a way that manipulates someone towards a particular behavior. That's a big ethical question that a lot of people are exploring around gamification, around, are people aware of how these things that we're doing are shaping their behavior and getting them toward a thing? And it comes to an awareness. And if you're interested in playing in the gamification space, or you are, I encourage you to do some research into some of that difference between manipulation and motivation, because I think it's an important ethical compass to keep in our work. Coming down from the soapbox again. Workflow learning. This is a big trend in our industry. It's not even though workflow learning is a new term, it's not a new idea. When I've done this, it's a major part of the work that we do. I think it's a major part of the lens through which we need to approach our work as we go forward. But I struggled with this slide about what to not only the image to use, but what to label it. I could have labeled it workflow learning, micro learning, performance support, just-in-time training, or whatever buzzword we want to apply to it next. I was talking about workflow learning in my work when in banking and nonprofit before I even applied a label to it. I would just describe it in the context of, we need to find the least disruptive way to solve this problem for people. We don't need to, everything doesn't need to be a course that is going to take people 5 hours to do. Sometimes you just need to get someone, sometimes people don't even necessarily need to, sorry if this offends anybody, they don't need to learn anything. They just need to solve a problem in the moment. And this conversation around workflow learning and performance support has been going on for decades. It's just taken on different labels. And I think why it's so powerful now and creating so much momentum isn't so much that the idea is new, it's that the technology has caught up to the idea, that we now have the ability through technology to find ways to insert ourselves into the workflow. That's one of the reasons I like the term workflow learning, because it really hits that value proposition. A term like micro learning to me doesn't hit the value proposition. A lot of the distractions around how long should the content be? Should it be 2 minutes? Should it be 2 minutes and 10 seconds? What really makes a micro thing? Gets us away from what I think is the core value of finding ways to get in there. I always thought the focus on micro learning, when it became a buzzword, got lost. I hate buzzwords. I hate buzzwords because of the way I define a buzzword. I define a buzzword as a term whose usage is spreading faster than its understanding. And micro-learning to me was definitely one of those. Micro-learning to me should never have been about the micro of the content. It should have been about the micro of the context, understanding where someone is doing, what they're doing, how they're doing it, and delivering the piece of content or the particular resource that is necessary in the context of that exact moment to help someone. Again, a great thing to look at is other fields that are doing this. Google has done a lot of work in the marketing and sales space around this idea of micro moments, which is recognizing in a digital space that moment when someone is literally sitting on the metaphorical fence of, I'm either going to make a purchase or I'm going to step away from making a purchase, and being able to recognize that particular moment and give someone the exact thing that they need to push them towards the sale. That's what we're talking about in the context of workflow learning, is being able to recognize what people are doing and make available to them in a very easy and seamless manner the resources that they need to either understand or just get the answer to applying a specific skill. And I do think that technology is rapidly advancing in a way that we as organizations can play more in that space. And I think, and again, my leaning on the word organizations is very intentional there. As organizations, we can play in the workflow learning space more than we ever have. We have technologies that are enabling us as L&D professionals to do that as well. But a lot of times workflow learning is just good design. It's just something that is designed in a way that you can easily get the answers that you need. Even something like as gaming is an example. When I was a kid, a game came with an instruction manual. Pac-Man came with like a 30-page instructional manual. I got to find it so I can read what it said, but it had a 30-page instructional manual on how to play Pac-Man. You think about the games we play today, they're much more complex and there's no instructions. The game is designed in a way that you start leveling up and you develop different skills and you can get the answers contextually through the experience. That's the kind of thing that we need to be looking, and a lot of applications that people are using in their work are designed in that manner, that it's just easy to get the answer and you just start, it's designed in a way that's easy to use, or you can get the answers and the support that you need. We need to be doing more of that. We need to understand that the tools that people are using are designed in that way, and we need to look at our own work through that lens of what's the least disruptive way that we can solve this problem, get people the resources they need. And it starts from, in my opinion, with just changing the default. There's a lot of things that you'll find online, and you hear a lot of speakers talking about how courses are bad, courses are this, courses are that. Courses are not bad. I'm not someone who hates the course. I do hate the course being the default. I don't think we should ever have anything that is a default, that there's this idea of somebody's got a problem, therefore I need to create a course, or therefore I need to create training. That to me is wrong. We shouldn't be defaulting to those things. We should be defaulting towards what's the least disruptive way that we can solve this problem for people, because that's just the environment that we're in. And workflow learning is probably the most tactical way that our industry has coalesced around that idea. Next one, curation. Curation to me is a very interesting thing. I've always been passionate about curation. Curation to me is reflective of the world that we live in. We've all probably heard some level of a description of how much information is out there, how much the world has. The answer is already out there. The chances are, why would we create something when the answer to it already exists? And we will be better serving our organizations to to reflect our work in there. You know, it used to be a case of whoever knew the most was the most important person in an organization. Now that shifted to whoever can find the answer the fastest. And that's what curation is. That's a mindset of the answer's out there. Can I get it? Can I give people the context as to why that matters? There's a whole long description of it that we can go over why curation is important, but that's the core of it, is being able to find the answer is more valuable to organizations than necessarily starting from a place of I need to create the answer. The one thing I would always emphasize if you're going into curation is make sure that you're doing your research about whether or not you have rights and whether or not you can share the information that you're finding. That's very quickly overlooked in the world of curation. Going quickly through a couple of the latter technologies, virtual reality. Virtual reality has emerged. It's been around for a long time, but I think the hardware has caught up to the promise, and in terms of the costs that are there. VR, I think, is going. I mentioned it earlier around the use cases of looking at things through the new lens and understanding like what problems to solve. That's where VR to me is very powerful. It plays in a very narrow but powerful space of giving people the opportunity to practice in environments where practicing in the real world has too much risk, be it financial risk or literally the world of life and death. And if you have the ability to practice in a safe environment where the risks of practicing in a live environment are too great, then VR is a great solution for that. And the bar is coming down rapidly, both in terms of the hardware accessibility and the ability to create content and experiences that people can go through on here. And I do think that VR is going to have a very powerful, narrow slice of the pie that it can't be done any other way. The flip side of VR, often discussed, is AR. And while VR, I think, has a very narrow use case that is going to be very powerful, I think the use case of AR is much broader. I think AR is going to just change the way that we interact in a digital world in many fascinating ways. While VR has more adoption today because it got out, it matured a little faster than AR. AR is there today, but I don't think that the true potential is. I think we need to make a leap in AR in order for it to truly change the world of workplace learning and performance. Right now, most AR experiences are like this, where you're doing it through a smartphone, but it's not until we get to headsets that I think that we're really going to see a transformative change in terms of how AR is used. Mainly because when you're doing hand-based AR, yeah, it's powerful and you can put an overlay over the real world, but you have something in your hand. So your ability to interact with that digital environment is limited. But when we have a headset, we have our hands free and we can interact with that digital experience. Challenge with the headsets is that they look like this, and they're not normalized yet in terms of our culture. But once they get normalized, it will have a transformative way of impacting learning and performance. The other thing I think you need to realize is this is not a learning and performance tool, although some organizations may be purchasing it for their L&D department to use in that context. But this is a productivity tool. This is a tool that's going to be purchased in most organizations by the manufacturing floor or by the floor team as a tool for people to use in their work to make them more effective. So even if you're as an L&D team not going to use these proactively in the context of L&D, chances are the work that you support is going to change to incorporate this into it. So you're going to need to be supporting people's use of these in their work. So keep in mind that there's a couple of different angles for AR, but I think the more common one is that it's going to come in from outside of L&D, and L&D is going to then need to support it. So if you're in that sort of a context, make sure you're looking at it through that lens as well. Wearable technology, less of an L&D context, but I put it in here from the standpoint of data. We have all sorts of different types of technology that's embedded into our clothes and things that we're carrying, all of which is generating data and enabling us to interact and understand people's interactions in a way that is transformative. If you want to understand how wearable technology is helping us understand performance, look at examples from the sports world about how people are wearing clothes that have sensors in it that can give them a better understanding of how they're performing. And you can kind of see how that could trickle down into workplace contexts as well. I haven't talked about it yet, and a lot of you who are watching this might be thinking about AI. You haven't mentioned AI yet. That's because AI is kind of the underpinning of a lot of these things. It's kind of the foundation that is enabling a lot of the different things that we're talking about here. And AI, to me, I like images like this. Unfortunately, I think a lot of times when we talk about AI, we see images like this. It's about the robots taking over, and it's about people losing their jobs. And it's not about that for me. For me, it's not about technology replacing humans. It's about technology replacing the work that technology is better to do, the rote tasks, so that humans can focus more on the uniquely human value that we add to an experience. It's about working with technology, not against it, and not about technology taking our jobs away. And it all comes together with this idea of the Internet of Things. I mean, we're in an environment now where everything has an internet connection. Everything can connect to each other and therefore have the context of what the world is around us. We are rapidly approaching a world where, giving a very quick example, like I have an Apple Watch on right now that is broadcasting a verified signal of David Kelly based on the fact that I put it on its clasp and I put it in my coat. And as I'm walking around, different devices that are connected and have a signal can verify that it's me. I could walk up to a car and have it unlocked. Not my car, not yet. But you can walk up to a car and just have it unlocked based on the fact that it's there. My iPhone now will unlock just based on the fact that it recognizes that my phone is here. And things like that. But you take that technology a little step further. I could walk up to a piece of equipment and it recognizes that it's me and therefore unlocks. And it knows that David Kelly is about to use that piece of equipment. And because it knows David Kelly is about to use that piece of equipment, it goes out and via API and connects to the competency management system that the organization is using to recognize what level of competency I have with this piece of equipment that I'm about to use, and comes back with an appropriate layer of supports to whether I'm a beginner, an intermediate, or an advanced user. Customizes the experience based on the competency that I have. All of the individual pieces of that little scenario I painted exist today. They just haven't been packaged in a way to deliver that experience on scale. But when we talk about an Internet of Things world, we're getting towards that. So what does all of this mean? What does this mean to the changes of L&D as we reach the end of our time here together? There's a lot of things. First off, we hear this phrase learning and performance ecosystems, and I think that that's a lens through which we need to look at the work that we do. It's about the interconnectedness about different things. It's about cause and effect in terms of inserting something into the environment. What's the ripple effect and how does that affect different things? And not looking at the work that we do in isolation. There's a lot of things that support someone's ability to learn and perform in a workplace, and understanding all of those different factors and how it affects individuals is a key lens through which to look at our work. We also have this idea of learning personalization. We've been talking about it for a while. If you walk around an expo, you'll see a lot of vendors saying we support learning personalization. I don't think that we're there. A lot of times learning personalization is described as like a Netflix of learning type of an environment. And for me, that's more of a recommendation engine, which is a good thing. But for me, personalized learning is not about personalized interests. It's about personalized competency, like I was just describing before. And we're getting closer to that, but I think that we still have some advancements to make to really deliver upon the opportunity of personalization. And then we have digital learning, which is a term that is rising again. I do think it's a buzzword that we're at risk of diluting the value of. For me, digital learning is not about digital technology. It's not about digital teaching. It's not about digital education. The most important word in digital learning is learning. And if you're talking about digital learning and describing, and you find yourself talking about the activities of education and training, I think you're losing the value of the phrase digital learning. Digital learning should be described in terms of the activities of learning. What are the learners doing? What are people naturally doing? And how are they learning through those activities in a digital environment? That's the potential that we should be exploring in digital learning. So what do we do? How do we get prepared for this brave new world that we're steaming down the road towards? Well, the first thing I congratulate you, you're already doing. It's by plugging into environments like this, by plugging into not only L&D spaces where you can connect and share and see what other people are doing and get yourself out of the silo of your organization, but do it outside of L&D as well. I mentioned marketing and sales and all these different areas that you can plug into to learn how others are applying different things and the lessons that they've learned that we can apply in L&D. But you want to plug into those different communities. You want to listen to what people are doing, listen to what other organizations are doing, and really listen to the lessons that they're learning. But don't just be a fly on the wall. Get involved in the discussion, ask questions, add your own flavor to it, because it's only by getting involved in those discussions that you're going to get to that thing I keep coming back to that is so important, which is the context, understanding why it matters to you. This was a proven practice that worked somewhere else. How does it apply in my context, in my organization, in the work that I'm doing? And the last advice I always give people as it applies to technology is just approach it with a sense of play. I mentioned earlier, I've used my phone somewhere around 187 times today. I've got somewhere around 300 apps on my phone. I recognize it's a problem. I'm getting help. But the reason that I have 300 apps on my phone is anytime somebody mentions an app, like, oh, I had this cool app, did this cool thing, I download it. I might play with it for 5 minutes. I might play with it for 5 days. I might play with it. It might become something that I use all the time. But that curiosity and that approach of playing with different things that are out there gives me the context of what's possible. It helps me view things in a different way. I mentioned so as we close our time here, I mentioned that URL at the beginning. Here it is again. That's going to take you to a page on my blog that has slides here, but as you've seen in the last hour, these slides are not very helpful. But it's going to, anything I mentioned resource-wise is going to be on here. And there's a lot of resources that I didn't have time to mention that can help you get a deeper dive if you want to explore. I obviously have a lot of passion around fields like this. These are ways that you can contact me. If you want to continue the conversation, I encourage you to do so. And I'm always happy to have these conversations. And again, I'll close by just saying thank you to David and the Learning Ideas Conference for having me here. Thank you for being a part of this conference. And David, I will turn it back over to you. Thanks, everybody.
All right, David, thank you so much. Really enjoyed the talk, and a couple of questions, just a little bit of time, I guess, as we go into the break. A couple questions from people in the audience. So somebody asked for the link again for the tech.
Probably the link that I shared at the beginning. That's the one on the bottom of the screen now.
Okay, great. All right.
And I will put that link back into chat as well while we're sitting here.
Fantastic. No, that would be great. And then there's time for maybe a question or two if people have one, and then we'll head to the break. And then I had one quick one while we're waiting for other people. Give me a second to finish the chat. But you talked about early on, how organizations are notoriously slow to change, right? And L&D is notoriously slow to change, right? So, you said, well, when you ask, what's it going to be like in 3 years, you think about what's going to be like now, and there's a lot of truth to that. But what are your thoughts on how we can accelerate the pace of that? Are there things we can do? There are so many things that we'd like to be able to do more rapidly. The world changes more quickly outside of corporations and L&D than it did before. Are there things we can do to try to, bring about quicker change, especially as we bring about, sort of creating new ways of learning and employing new technologies in the right ways and all that stuff. So curious to know your thoughts, having worked with, being so familiar with organizational learning on what we might be able to do to bring change about a little bit more rapidly.
Sure. The biggest thing that I always recommend people is nobody likes change for change's sake. They've got to be invested in it, and it's not about talking about the change. It's talking about the outcome that can come from a change. So when you have those opportunities that you try something new, you wanted to try something different, you have those opportunities to do that, even if it's something small. Celebrate it. Celebrate what you've done well. Make sure that people are aware that we tried something different and we got a different outcome, and it's a better outcome. The more that you can share those stories, the more people will be open to trying new things. The more you will find those, as much as it can be a bit of a cliche, those champions of learning. That was always an important thing for me when I worked in organizations, was to find people that were going to allow me to try something different, and to just give them all the energy that we could, not to solve the problems, not that I would give them anything less than other people less, but when I had an opportunity with someone who was passionate, who was going to give me the empower me to just do what I thought was right, and to do it the way that I thought was going to be done, rather than just treating the training department as a delivery vehicle, we gave them all the efforts. We made that, we wanted to showcase our opportunities to really lean into that. And I think that's a huge element of it, is when you have those opportunities to play in that space, make them as visible as you can. Nothing helps people get on board for change as much as seeing the benefits of those changes.
Oh, absolutely. No, that's a great point. And your point about the champion is particularly well taken. I know in my own work as a consultant, and with my company, Classical Learning on the outside, that when we have a champion within an organization, you're doing something different, it's an incredible difference. You get somebody who can really make things happen and help the organization think about things in a different way. Well, great. Well, we've gone too long. I think we could probably talk for another hour happily with you, but we're going to probably wrap up here. It's great to have you here, David. Hopefully we'll see you around over the next couple of days as well. And great seeing you as always. So David Kelly, thanks so much for such a wonderful talk. And otherwise, we're going to head to break and back just in about 10 minutes, 10:30 for the parallel sessions starting up at 10:30. So David, thanks again. Great to see you. And thanks to everybody else.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.
All right. Take care.